There we are. Hey, Venkat, how are you?
Hey, good seeing you.
Good to see you as well. Now, we would normally meet on a Java track because my background is Java. Venkat, your background is, well, anything that you can do on a computer, basically, right? It's you cover a wide range of different ecosystems.
Well, times are such. What can we say?
Excellent. So for those who don't know Venkat, Venkat is a very well-renowned author, speaker, and actually one of the most humble and best humans around as well. Venkat is the founder of Agile Developer. You can catch a whole bunch of Venkat's sessions online, as well as some of the courses and things like that he does on Agile Developer. So well worth going to see more of what Venkat does if you haven't heard him speak before. So today, Venkat, you're going to be talking about rediscovering JavaScript, right? So this is, are we talking about people who once did JavaScript, then went away maybe to a better language like Java, let's say, and now they need to rediscover JavaScript?
Well, JavaScript itself has changed a lot over time, and I want to talk about what's really new and nice and cool in JavaScript. If you're able to see my screen, awesome. So let's get started. Thank you. So hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm going to talk about some amazing features in JavaScript. Well, JavaScript was that very scary language once upon a time. And it had several problems in it. Well, they've done a lot of cleanup, and modern JavaScript is very approachable. And that's what I want to focus on today in the next about 20 or so minutes we have with us. So some of the beautiful features of JavaScript that I really have come to like are things that have improved and reduced error and make it really pleasant to use the language. But one of the things we have to be really careful about JavaScript is, unlike languages like Java and a lot of other languages, JavaScript doesn't have the luxury of deprecating features. And the reason is there are going to be old browsers that are going to still process all the code you send towards them. There are going to be a lot of old JavaScript that are thrown towards new browsers as well. So from both points of view, JavaScript cannot really simply say, oh, out with the old, in with the new. That doesn't work in JavaScript. It's for us to really use tools like ESLint and make sure that we don't use features anymore that are not really good features. One of them is a var. Well, var is evil. We don't want to use var, and var has several problems in it. For example, if you take an example of a var right here, you can see the value is 100. Now, why in the world would anyone redefine a variable that's been defined already, but var allowed you to do that in the past, which doesn't make any sense at all. Secondly, var had other problems as well. For example, in terms of not regarding block scoping. Well, all that is gone now, thankfully, if we quit using var. And the recommendation is to use a const as much as possible and use let otherwise. Now let's quickly take a look at an example here. So I say let max equal to 100, and I'm going to say let max equal to 1. Notice we get an error. And the reason is we cannot redefine a variable that's been defined already. Now with the let, of course, you can reassign a value. You just cannot redefine a variable. Well, that's cool. So instead of using var, we could use let. But there's one problem with let as well. So the recommendation is quit using var. Well, use let only if const is not an option. Now, why is const better? Well, the reason is const is the go-to syntax, if you will, for defining variables. Why? Because a constant treats its variable as a constant. With a little caveat here, it is kind of like final in Java, or it's kind of like read-only in C#. So in other words, it only protects the reference, not the object itself, but that's still really useful. Why so? Let's take a look at an example. If I say factor equal to 2 right here, and I'm going to create, let's say, a printed right there is equal to, given an element, I want to print out element times factor. Now, I call the printed function right here, if you will, and I'm going to pass, let's say, a 4. Now, we know that 4 times 2 is 8, and so we can look at the output of what we see here. It's 8, no surprise about it. Now, what if I were to change factor to a 0 right here? Now, the question is, what is the output over here? Now, I can't see you, but I will assume you're virtually raising your hand. Raise your hand if you think the output is still 8. Well, raise your hand if you think the output is going to be 0. But raise your hand if you think, boy, I'm really confused. Well, that's the camp I belong in. I usually use this question as an interview question. I would ask this question, and if a candidate tries to answer, they are fired already. Because the right answer is, are you stupid? Well, the reason is, I don't want to write code like this. I want to write code that's maintainable. Now, clearly, we can run the code here and see what the result is, but that's really not the point. I don't want code that kind of makes me confused and wonder what's going on. So what if I change this to a const instead? Notice I get an error on line number 9 because I cannot modify the reference or the variable that's being defined as a constant. So constant is your friend. Well, this is again where I would like to use tools like ESLint, where I can configure it to say, if I don't use a constant where it could be used, give me an error. So prefer constant as much as you can and use let only when const is not an option and quit using var. Well, likewise, there are a few other interesting additional things that are replacing old things, and one of them is arguments. So what is an argument? Let's take a quick look here. So let's say we have a function called max, which is taking a and b. And all I'm going to do here is, if a is greater than b, I'm going to output, let's say, a. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and say output, in this case, oh, let's say b. Well, let's call max with 1 and 2. No surprise over here. It said 2. What if I call max with 3 and 1, or 1, for example? Hey, that's great also. It worked. But what if I said max with 4 and maybe 12 and 2? Well, gosh, that seems to work as well. What just went on here? Well, JavaScript doesn't complain if you give more arguments than the number of parameters that you have in a function. Why? That's because JavaScript treats you like a guest in its house. It doesn't say you're stupid. It just kind of smiles away. So, but what really happened here is every single function in JavaScript is actually a var arg function. So in the case of Java, C#, C++, a lot of other languages, you write functions that take specific number of arguments in one way, and functions that take variable number of arguments in a different way. In Java, every function takes variable number of arguments. So how do you really get to these arguments? Well, the old way of doing it was to use what are called arguments. Well, unfortunately, though, this had its own problems. Arguments were not really an array, so you couldn't treat it as an array, and you couldn't use the functional style code in here. Let's take a quick example of how we can write this code using arguments and refactor to be much better. So let's say 1 and 3 and let's say 6 and maybe a 2. And I want to find what's the maximum of all of these, and maybe I want to just return it. So here's a way we could do this using arguments, not a very pleasant way of doing it. Notice if I don't put anything here, it actually takes variable number of arguments, so it's not very intuitive. The code is not self-describing. Secondly, we could say over here, let arguments, let's say large is equal to arguments of 0, let's say, and eventually I want to return, let's say the large in this particular case, which is a 1, but that's not a right answer yet. So then we can say for, we could say let an element, okay, in this case, or maybe we could say let I equal to 0, I less than arguments dot length. Oh, what a boring way to write this code, isn't it? This is not going to invite any friends at all. Excuse me. Then we could say if large is, let's say, less than, well, arguments of I, we could then say maybe large in this case is equal to the arguments of I, and we can find out what the large is. Again, that's not very pleasant code to write, but we could write the code like this. So if large is less than, so large started with the 0, and if large is, excuse me, less than arguments of I, we want to say that large is equal to the value of arguments of I and kind of iterate through this and check for the value. Well, obviously, if the large is the value that we want to be large value, and we want to be able to determine that. Now, obviously, that's still not working. We could, spend time looking at it, debugging it, but why not simply use a nice functional style, be done with it? And also, arguments is not an array like I mentioned. So if I were to say type of or arguments, instance of array, notice that it says false. It's not an array, which is really unpleasant, as you can see in this case. Now, what can we do about all of this? Well, rather than messing with all of that, let's simply use what is called a rest parameter. So we can say numbers over here. Now, the good news about numbers is we can say numbers is an instance of array, and notice it says true. So that's a good news. It's an array, so you can treat it as an array, which means I could do something like this. Numbers.reduce, for example, I'm a big fan of a functional style of coding. We could say large comma element, and then we could simply say, if large is less than the element, then return the element. Otherwise, I want to return maybe the large value itself. Now, notice how easy that was to write the code in the functional style. And we can, of course, use a traditional for loop if we really wanted to, but we're not required to, as you can see in this case. So that's the rest parameter. Now, obviously, in this case, that's really nice. But what if I really had an array to begin with? So constant array is equal to, let's say, 1, 2, and 4. And I want to be able to call max with, let's say, array. Not quite what we wanted, isn't it? We really wanted a result of 4. What went wrong here? Well, because it's passing the array as a value, but numbers itself is an array, so it wrapped an array inside of an array. That's not what we really wanted. But what if I wanted to really do this correctly? Well, we could try something like this. We could try to really explode those values or spread those values as discrete values. Well, that worked. But if I were to write code like this, my comment would be, I need another job. That's boring. Well, this is where the spread operator comes in. So you can say max, and then you can say arguments and call it. Oh, wait a minute. We use 3 dots here and 3 dots here. What gives? Well, sit back for a second. What is plus? Plus is both a binary and a unary operator in programming, isn't it? Similarly, ... is both a rest and a spread operator. So it's a rest on the receiving end, and it's a spread on the sending end. Hey, RR and SS, easy to remember. Rest on the receive and send on the spread on the send. So this is a spread. But what's really cool about spread is there are so many things you can do with it. So you don't have to use a spread with the rest all the time. For example, greet name 1 comma name 2. Let's say over here output, let's say hello, and I'm going to say name 1 and let's say name 2. Well, if I want to call this, I can say greet, and I could say Jack comma Jill, for example, as 2 different values in here. Well, that's great, it worked. But what if I had a constant names equal to, let's say Jack comma Jill already in a collection? Well, look at the beauty of this. You could call greet with names, and you can use a spread right there as well. But like spread is my second most favorite feature. Let's look at a couple of more things you can do with spread. Suppose you had, in this case, names as you saw here. We'll call it names 1, but I want to call a const names 2, let's say, is equal to, let's say in this case, a Tom comma Jerry, our other good friends we have. So I want to be able to combine these two. Well, we could say names 1 as an array, we could explode that. And then we could say names 2, and we could really combine the 2 arrays together, if you will. Or you can even insert an element right in the middle. Like, for example, you could say spike over here, and you could add another element to this collection if you really wanted to. Very powerful, as you can see. Similarly, you can use a spread operator for objects as well, not just array. Very, very powerful features, as you can see. Similarly, you also have a nice little default parameters given to us also. Let me touch on default really quickly. So constant greet equals to, let's say a function, we'll call it as name, And I want to simply say output hello, and then I'm going to provide the name given to us. So we could say, for example, something along the lines of, oh, we could say greet, let's say, Sarah here, and call this function. Now, obviously, it says, hello, Sarah. But what if we want to give a message when we call this? Maybe we can say hello. Instead of that, we want to say, yeah, hi. How do we pass suddenly a second parameter called hi? Well, if you were to come and change this to maybe a message, and if you change this to a dollar message, this is not going to go really well. Because of the first line for existing code, it's going to say undefined Sarah. Well, Sarah just unfriended you on Facebook. That's not a nice way to greet anybody. Well, how do you deal with this? Well, what you can do here is you can give a default value of hello. So the old code or existing code still works as it's supposed to, and you can introduce a new parameter. Not only that, these can be expressions as well. So this could become an expression, if you will, and that expression could actually use the previous parameter in the expression if you want to make it a lot more flexible. Very powerful, as you can see. And finally, on this note, I will touch on an enhanced for loop as well. So if you have a collection of names equal to, let's say, Tom, Jerry, well, you don't have to really use the old for loop, the boring, like I equal to 0, I less than syntax. You could write a very fluent syntax. For example, you could say a constant, hey, what a relief, name of names, and simply print out a name right there. And of course, what about the index if you really wanted to get the index? This is where you can mix destructuring with this as well. So you can say entries over here, and then you can destructure into it by simply providing an I, name, and you can see that you can get the index value, and also you can get the value in the particular index as well very easily by using a very nice little syntax of destructuring, if you will, along with the fluent enhanced for loop. So makes life really pleasant to work with. Well, quickly, arrow functions are pretty awesome. They reduce the burden of writing functions. You got to be careful of the semantical mismatch between regular functions and arrow functions. I won't have time to go through them in here, but something to take a look at. You already saw me use template literals quite a bit. So those are template literals, which allow you to expand expressions while you're creating strings. And keep in mind, these are backticks and not really a single quote or a double quote. And object literals are really useful as well. And in that, you can really you create an object very easily by tying a local variable to a property very nicely. So for example, if I had a name is equal to, let's say in this case, Sam, and if I also had a constant age is equal to 2, and if I really wanted to create a person is equal to name is name, let's say, and then I'm going to say age is equal to age. Well, these are local variables being tied to a property, but you don't have to really go that route. You can simply remove those and nicely use an object literal. Well, this may not make sense in a simple example like this, but when used with destructuring, it can be really powerful. So what is destructuring in under a minute? Destructuring is one of my favorite features in JavaScript. You can nicely extract properties from objects, if you will. So for example, if I have an array, let's say in this case, 1, 2, and 3. Well, what if I want to get the values of the array? You could say first is equal to array 0, for example, and you can say a third is equal to array 2. You could get the values like this. And then you could print the first, if you will, and you could print the third one here as well. But that's kind of boring, isn't it? Well, you can simply say, comma, second, comma, third, like this, and then you can simply destructure it and array into those fields. What if I don't care about the second in reality? Well, you don't have to really, just put a little comma and as a placeholder, and you can get that. Or what if you want to get everything else? And I can say all else and use a spread and get everything else into it as well. Isn't that pretty awesome? Well, that is destructuring, and you can do the similar things with objects as well. And then finally, just to quickly mention about classes, well, it used to be really a pain in the neck to create classes in JavaScript. Now it feels almost like writing Java code. So class car constructor, and in this case, I'm going to take a year, and I'll say this dot year equal to year, and set the value. Then I can say, for example, this dot kilometers is equal to 0 as well. But then I can write a function called distance. This is going to simply return, let's say, this dot km. Well, constant car equal to new car, let's say 2020. And then I'm going to simply output car dot distance as a function. But what if I don't want a function? I want to treat it like a property. Well, unlike Java, where properties are not implemented in an elegant way, JavaScript does something like C#. You can write a property using a get, and as a result, you treat it like it's a field, but it's actually a function that executes behind the scenes, so you can perform logic in determining that value as well. Very powerful. So to summarize what we talked about here, a very powerful set of features, as you can see, that gives us the ability to write code with greater fluency, greater elegance, and makes our life really easy and reduces a lot of errors. So JavaScript has come a long way, and it almost feels right when we write code in JavaScript. It is definitely a language I have been fearful in the past, but in all honesty, if I can say it aloud, it's a language I've started to fall in love with over the past few years, and I definitely enjoy it. Hope that was useful. I would be delighted to listen to some of your questions or comments if you have any. Simon, if you want to look at the questions for me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Venkat. Always amazed at the how fluent you are in switching between languages and things like that. But awesome. I guess my first question. You said you're almost enjoying JavaScript. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yep.
What's the bit you need? Do you feel that that will make you enjoy it?
Well, so JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. And one of my concerns oftentimes is you don't have the support of compile time verification. Now, I'm a big fan of automated testing, so I write test and write code. But a lot of times I do feel like an early, error, fail fast is much better. As much as I want to see my test fail if I make a mistake, I would rather get that failure before I run that test itself. That's a little part, I wish there were a better way to handle that. But again, you lose some, you gain some as well. So it's really a balance at that point.
Awesome. So first question straight away, which is always the question which you tend to get when I hear you speaking. What is the IDE you're using? It's TextMate, right? Yes,
it is TextMate. And if people want to know how to configure this, it's a free presentation I have on agilelearner.com. And you go to agilelearner.com and type TextMate, and you can look at the free presentation, or people can ask the question for that on Twitter or by email, and I'll be more than happy to send the link to how to set this up. You can set this up for JavaScript, Java, Python, almost any language I program in, I use the same setup.
Awesome. And sorry, it was agilelearner.com, not agiledeveloper.com.
That's right. Yeah, agilelearner.com, and just type TextMate on the URL.
Excellent. I'll drop that link into the chat as well. So Ryan is asking in Slack. Ryan asks, when choosing a language for a new project, do you choose JavaScript over TypeScript, given the choice?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And in all honesty, I am perfectly comfortable with JavaScript. And I mentioned that compiler check would be nice to have. That's one of the things that TypeScript gives you. But at the same time, remember that TypeScript compiles down to JavaScript. And there are a few rough edges around it. And TypeScript does have a few interesting features that JavaScript doesn't have, but TypeScript also doesn't have a few things that JavaScript has. So on the balance, I generally tend to stay with JavaScript most of the time. I just don't feel the need personally for TypeScript. Even though the compiler support can be really useful, but that has not drawn me towards that. I know both the languages fairly well, but I tend to really stick to JavaScript most of the time.
Awesome. And yeah, John actually just mentioned as well regarding your concerns with JavaScript. TypeScript does give you that kind of compile time insurance as well, which is similar to what you just said as well.
Yeah.
Another question from Naveen. What are the new features that you expect JavaScript to support, which it doesn't currently support?
Oh, the language is evolving quite a bit, and there are a lot of things that are happening. I'm not sure if I like everything they are supporting or are planning to support. Again, it's a future. I don't know what the future is. It depends on how things evolve. A lot of things are fluid. There are a lot of features that are in different languages. I'm a huge fan of languages like Scala, Kotlin, Python, Haskell. If JavaScript can provide lazy evaluations, that would be something really awesome. That would be, pushing us towards, JavaScript has had functional style of coding for a long time, but it's not a functional language by any stretch of imagination. If I were to work for one thing, laziness would be awesome.
Okay, sorry. Have you tried JSDoc in IDEs, which provides you some additional support there, which maybe you can also use.
Yeah, that requires me to use IDEs, and I stay away from
If you were stuck between an IDE and Slack, which direction would you turn?
Oh my goodness, you're putting me on the spot right here.
Awesome. Okay, so I think there's no more questions on Slido. I think there's a number of people typing in Slack. Here we go. Okay, Venkat, here's a good one from this is Naveen again. What's your opinion on JavaScript over Java on the server side? So I guess we're mostly talking about Node here, Node.js.
Yeah.
And yeah, a couple of people. So Fiber also says that's also going to interest them as well in terms of what you would pick on the server side.
Yeah, so I'll generalize this to any language question I normally get asked. I use 15 different languages, and I often say that I change languages like I change my shirt or underwear for that matter. It doesn't really matter. Well, but the point really is, it really comes down to the environment. If I have a lot of Java code I have to talk to, if I have to talk to the JVM libraries and installations, yes, absolutely, I will use Java for that purpose. If my team is extremely comfortable with Java, or if I really need, think of much beyond that, designed by contract versus designed by capability. A statically typed language like Java gives you design by contract. Dynamic type languages give you design by capability. And these two are, two different approaches to doing things. And I've written server-side code in languages like Java. I've also written server-side code in dynamic type languages. And if I have a really good amount of discipline with automated testing, then I don't have a fear to go back and forth between them. And so my usual decision is, the team, the environment, the libraries I have to integrate with. Backend is not just a single entity. There's a lot of stuff I have to integrate with, and that makes a decision. If it's a greenfield project, I don't have much to depend on, I would then say, hey, pick your choice based on your preference. If it's not a greenfield, the environment usually dictates where you have to go. I know that's a non-committal answer. I normally don't want to say pick this, and I definitely don't ever say that in public to say that's what you have to do, because that would be really naive to make such a recommendation.
Awesome. There's another question in Slack, but if I ask just with the timing in mind for the next talk, if you wouldn't mind going into Slack and I apologize, but going into Slack for a short time and answering that'll be awesome. Venkat, massive thank you again. Thank you for supporting this great cause, and we really, really appreciate your time. If you want to hear more from Venkat, and you should go to agilelearner.com for more great content from Venkat.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks, everybody.
Speak to you soon.